Ben Shapiro gets an atheist to admit this in his hardest debate yet. Recently, Ben Shapiro sat down with one of the biggest voices in the YouTube atheist community, Alex O'Connor. But this discussion wasn't typical Ben Shapiro owning the libs at some random college debating some leftist 19-year-old. No, Alex O'Connor is viewed as a savant in the space. He comes off very intelligent, has been debating and discussing different theists for years, and even recently had a video go viral where he convinced ChatGPT that a god exists. So in this discussion, Ben Shapiro and Alex O'Connor have a heated debate where they go into a deeply personal topic that most non-religious people would probably disagree with. But before we get into that, guys, my name is Ruslan. This channel exists to encourage, empower, and inspire you to live a life that blesses God. If you're not new here, consider subscribing. What are you doing? All right, let's jump into the video. The overlap of free will in the Christian or the theist or whatever Judeo-Christian worldview, however you want to call it, and the lack of free will according to Alex O'Connor. If you don't know who Alex O'Connor is, he has a massive channel. He used to go by Cosmic Skeptic. He has a lot of really good conversations. He recently had my buddy Justin on to talk about his book. We reacted to some of the stuff. He did this thing with ChatGPT where he convinced ChatGPT that God existed, even though he's an atheist. Really, really interesting guy. But this conversation was fascinating, to say the least. So listen to what happens when they get into the concepts of free will.
Yes, with no God, there's no free will. But
with no God, there's no free will. Okay, so he's saying that Ben Shapiro's argument was that. Okay, now, this gets kind of wordy and philosophical, but where they land at with this first point is crazy, okay?
Somehow having God can solve this problem. I mean, you said a moment ago that you don't think you can establish God's existence through reason alone, but assuming that you do believe in the existence of free will, you think it's a real thing that you have.
Yes.
And simultaneously saying that if there is no God, then free will makes no sense.
Yes.
That does read to me like an argument for God's existence, such that in order to either say that there is free will, in order to say that there is free will, one must believe in God. And that does strike me as an argument for God's existence.
I mean, to slightly curve that, or to kind of sand off the rough edges there, I would say that the argument I made is an argument for something extra natural.
Sure.
Now, you can call that God or not God, but the thing that I'm making the argument for is that you cannot get from a materialist Darwinist universe to free will. That is not.
This is a very bold claim that Ben Shapiro is making here. Now, remember, Alex O'Connor is a very sharp guy. He's not like a pop atheist kind of guy. This guy is very educated, very smart. Some would argue he's a savant in terms of his high intellect, his IIQ. And Ben Shapiro and him basically are about to agree on a very shocking, I would say controversial point, which if there is nothing extra natural, meaning if you're just looking at the world through a materialistic, natural point of view, then there is no free will. That's a big shocker. And why that's a shock, the implications of that are also important. Okay, so let me let them unpack this.
Not possible. So I know that the way you solve that is that you say that there is no free will.
That's right.
And what I'm saying to you is you don't act that way.
So Alex O'Connor just admitted that there's no free will according to his material atheistic worldview. Ben Shapiro said that. Alex O'Connor agreed to that. Ben Shapiro then goes on, but you don't act that way. You do not act that way.
I hear this all the time. People say, look, you may say there's no free will, but you don't act as though that's the case. I suppose that I'm just confused as to what it would look like for somebody to act as if they believe there was no free will. I mean, the very argument that there is no free will that I subscribe to, at least one of the various forms that it takes, is a sort of Schopenhauerian view that you can do as you will, you just can't will what you will. And that you are essentially just a biological machine reacting to its internal and evolutionary drives. That
darkness.
You are just a biological machine reacting to its natural evolutionary. So this is crazy. I didn't know this was the atheist. This is your king. This is what you guys believe now? I've never heard of this. So you are just kind of floating through space as stardust, and all of your decisions are predetermined by your DNA and evolutionary programming? This is dark.
That's what's happening. Now, call that nihilistic if you like. That's a separate question, but
yeah, it's nihilistic. This is very, very much so nihilistic.
It's the question of how this would make one act. The idea that this might cause us to sort of lay around in bed all day or something. The very mechanism that I think is responsible for eliminating the possibility of free will, that is, the drives that make people do what they do. Like I say, do exactly that. Make people do what they do. They make them get out of bed in the morning. Why do you get out of bed and go and make your breakfast if there's no free will? So you go and get breakfast because there's no free will and something is driving you to do that that's outside of your control.
To get back to the nihilism point, which you kind of put aside, so that means that this conversation is essentially worthless in any sort of real sense. I mean, effectively, we were driven here by evolutionary biology and environment to have this conversation. Everybody who's watching this is driven by evolutionary biology and environment to have a particular reaction to that thing, and ever round the cycle goes. That seems like a very purposeless life. Again, I'm drawing from a realm that is not evolutionarily biologically, connected. The word purpose is really, teleology obviously has been.
I think people clearly have a will, at the very least, to make certain decisions to improve their life, and whether that's, I want to become a better person in my marriage. I want to be like. People have this even if they're not Christian. But let me just give you a very practical example. If we're talking about biology and just being driven by our evolutionary programming, that means that what we're seeing happening in America for the West is directly logical, meaning that what we're seeing happening with people, for example, 70% of people are overweight, 40% of people are morbidly obese. The reason why that is because we've engineered yummier, tastier food that's more calorically dense and less nutritionally valued, so that it makes sense for us to eat stuff that's savory, sweet, salty, because we're getting as many calories as we can. What does that mean? That means 70% of Americans are going to be overweight. Yet, I get to choose every day if I'm going to eat the chicken and broccoli or if I'm going to eat the processed foods that are genetically wired to make me more, to make me eat more. So the fact that even we can make a choice of, I'm going to eat junk and get fat, which is what a lot of people do, and Alex is saying it's because of their wiring, because we've never had this much access to this, or I'm going to eat chicken and broccoli and I'm going to eat things that are better for me so that I don't become like the 70%. I think that right there is indicative of, hey, I'm not just floating through space doing what I'm genetically wired to do. That's just one example. We can talk about marriage. We can talk about family. We can talk about whatever, right? That there is something very innate in us to want to improve our situation, to want to make better choices, to want to whether that's sculpting our body to be more physically healthy, whether that's improving our financial state, whether that's improving our marital state. I'm just speaking, just like remove the supernatural component of God changing our hearts. I'm just saying people naturally have this. I believe.
It's taken out of the realm of science pretty thoroughly by atheists and by many people in the sciences, although I would argue that, again, most scientists speak in the realm of teleology literally all the time, and they're borrowing language from the language of teleology, even when they're describing functions of particular body parts, right? The heart pumps blood in order to keep you alive, right? They're constantly using language that's teleological in nature. The real question that I have, and this is what goes to the question that you were asking at the beginning, before the sort of pre-question, which was the good of religion to society. One of those goods is people believing that their free will matters and this actually is a useful thing.
And herein lies one of the most crucial parts of this entire conversation is if there's no God, according to Alex, there's no free will. Yet we know that the very foundation of human flourishing is people believing that their free will matters, that they get a choice, that they have some form of responsibility to the greater good, to the transcendent, towards their own family, their own tribe.
So I believe that it is deeply important for people in society to believe that they have the capacity to change themselves and to make different decisions than what biology would drive them to do. So you say, well, it's biology that drives you to get out of bed in the morning, which is almost Calvinist in sort of the way that it's described, right? It's
Shout out to John Calvin. Never would have thought in a million years that Ben Shapiro, the Jew guy, would be talking to Alex O'Connor, the atheist, and referencing John Calvin. If you guys don't know who John Calvin is, it's a form of theology within Protestant circles that believes in predestination, specifically God's predestining to those who will be saved. I don't know if they would, even the most staunch Calvinists would say there's no free will in terms of people being able to make decisions to better their situation. I don't know if all Calvinists believe that, right?
It's like you're predestined to get out of bed in the morning, so thus you get out of bed in the morning. But the reality is that we are constantly making decisions as though those decisions make a difference in the universe. And what social science actually does tend to show is that when people believe that they have control over their own actions, and when they believe that they're capable of changing the way that they live, they do make those changes with more alacrity and in better directions than if they don't believe that. If people tend to believe in a deterministic universe, they do act worse. So it may work this is going to be sort of Straussian in its implications, but that may work for you. You're a very high IQ individual who can somehow reconcile the idea of living a very purposeful life with the idea that actually there's no purpose to anything. But for the vast majority of people, that is not actually how they live. And
Ben Shapiro's cooking here, man. The vast majority of people is not how they live. If you don't think that there's any type of will or purpose to life, the logical conclusions of nihilism are not good. And so if you have an Alex O'Connor or Alex Hermosi who are like, yeah, nihilism, but like I just get to make my own purpose and it's not that bad, right? Like that's not where most people are at, right? And I think they're maybe forgetting that they're the outlier in the situations, and so they can say these things like there's no free will, there's no purpose to anything, so you just kind of float through space and you just get to decide whatever. But we're talking about faith in a utilitarian standpoint. Right. And I think this is hugely important. So Ben Shapiro is really, 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 really cooking here. Hey, the logical conclusions of what you believe is nihilism. And nihilism is bad. Nihilism is bad for the individual. Nihilism is bad for the collective, for society, for structures, for institutions. It is bad.
I would suggest that even in your daily life, you don't get out of bed in the morning thinking, man, my biology is driving me this morning to get on the bike, have a great day, the sun is shining. That's my biology doing this. And I don't think that most people who live purposeful lives, even if they believe that everything they're doing is predetermined by the world around them, by their own biology, I don't believe they actually feel that. They have to engage in what they themselves would term an illusion in order to feel a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives.
Of course, but that's what the evolutionary process, in my view, in my worldview, I should say, has done so well, is provide precisely that illusion. I mean, it's not as that, I mean, you say, look, you don't get out of bed in the morning thinking, gosh, look at my biological
My neurons
drive.
are firing, yeah.
Of course not, because if I did, then the whole evolutionary purpose that this illusion serves would fall away. I mean,
but you do get up doing what you're genetically predisposed to do, which is, if we're going back to the food illustration, the pleasure illustration, you're going to consume as much pleasure as you possibly can. You're going to eat the high sugar, high processed cereal instead of, because it's faster and it gets sugar in your bloodstream faster, versus making the eggs and the chicken and the things that are going to satiate you and be good for you in the long term. If it's just all about evolutionary biology, you're going to do the thing that gives you the most amount of dopamine and pleasure first. That is how we're wired as people, according to his own worldview. So I don't understand how he could possibly detangle this. How can he detangle that people aren't just going to act, I just need dopamine and pleasure? That is what we want. We want that in our natural wiring, right? The scriptures call this the flesh, right? You got to submit the flesh to the spirit. So that's the part where I don't know how Alex can detangle this. And again, maybe this is just his degree of bias because he's a smart guy that naturally wants to eat the chicken and broccoli over the cereal, but like most people don't.
You say that this is a fairly purposeless life, and perhaps the implication is that it's a bit of a depressing one. I didn't come here to inspire optimism in people. I just think it is in fact the case.
By the way.
It is in fact the case that free will doesn't exist. And we may feel very nihilistic towards that, but as a wise man once said, facts don't care about your feelings.
So there you go. I didn't expect Alex O'Connor to be so straightforward in his view that free will doesn't exist. I think so much of the Old and New Testament is anchored on the very presupposition that people have free will, that people can either choose God or choose their own desires. They could either choose God or choose Satan. They could either choose to do the things that will improve their life and the life of their neighbor, or they can choose to do the things that will destroy and harm others, or for the secular humanist perspective, that will lead to human flourishing or lead to the harm of others. So this is beyond shocking to me that this is at the end of the secular humanist atheist position. I think this is extremely unpopular. I don't think it's true in the slightest, and I don't know how Alex consistently holds on to this position throughout the entire discussion. And because we have free will, I believe we can use our free will to either honor God or dishonor God, to press into a closer relationship with God or to drift further away, making ourself our own God, which is why we developed our Bless God prayer journal. Available now. In Matthew 7:7, Jesus says, "Seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open, ask and it will be given to you." And one of the best things I've been able to do is to develop the consistent discipline of prayer and quiet time. And so if you haven't gotten yours, pick yours up now, as we have them on back order and we'll be shipping them by the end of December. So these are the same exact prompts I've been using in my quiet time for decades. So go to blessgodprayer.shop, get yours now so that they can come in time for the new year, as we'll be shipping them at the end of December. I'll see you over there, all right? Peace.